I'm Howard Lovy, Managing Editor of the Alliance of Independent Authors, and you're listening to IndieVoices. You or your kids are going back to school now, but as we all know, the excitement comes with anxiety, financial anxiety. Among the many costs of college education, one thing that many parents fail to account for is the high cost of textbooks. My guest today is David Harris, Editor-in-Chief of OpenStax, based at Rice University, which has a solution to the problem. Hello, and welcome to IndieVoices, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to discuss this.
Great. Well, one reason I had to talk to you was that indie authors know that the old ways of publishing are becoming outdated. So while OpenStax is not technically self-publishing, I count it as in the same indie spirit as self-publishing, the idea of a more direct conversation between author and reader, or in this case, author, teacher, and student. Did I get that right?
I might differ a little bit with you on it. There's a very strong community aspect to it, in that communities of practice. But we do apply the rigors of a traditional publishing model to meet the requirements, the very demanding requirements of the education marketplace. And so all the materials are professionally reviewed by peers, professionally edited, etc.
Tell me about your personal background and what brought you to OpenStax.
Yeah, so I used to work for one of those traditional publishers. I was also a president of an ed tech company called WebAssign. And actually, when I was at WebAssign, one of our partners was a traditional publisher. And we started to see the prices escalating tremendously for students to access their content. And at WebAssign, we had an issue with that because we were based out of a university. And so that's when I first discovered open education resources and principally Connections, which was the precursor to OpenStax. And I found what they were doing was really interesting and very innovative in that they would openly license content and make it available to everyone free of charge. And that's how I got interested in OpenStax. And I joined them before it was OpenStax in 2012.
Oh, so you were in academic publishing before, and you saw how expensive it all was becoming.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started in academic publishing many, many years ago, it was a much different industry. There were many, many different publishers, and it really was focused on the benefits of the student in education. Then in the mid-2000s, a lot of these companies got acquired, and it changed the tenor of it. It was much more about financial operations and how can we maximize the quarterly results, which resulted in higher prices, bundling. And really, I had no interest in that, and that's why I left that side of the business.
So why is the traditional textbook publishing industry so high-priced?
There's a lot of traditional expenses that they have. You know, they have obviously royalty arrangements. They have very large sales forces, very large marketing expenses. But one of the real cost drivers really in the last 10 or 15 years have been supporting platforms, these educational platforms. And many publishers, they like to give the appearance that they're supporting one platform, but they're really having to support many different platforms. And that becomes very, very expensive at scale. On top of that, you have all of the debt that they've acquired that they have to service. So it's really this uncomfortable stew that put a tremendous pressure on pricing. I will say in the last couple of years, they have been making moves to lower prices to get more students engaged. But I think that's largely a result of what open education resources have done to the market.
Right, you're leading the way. We're not just talking about textbooks, but the ability to adapt and personalize course material, right? How does that process work?
Well, and that varies depending on the platform that is being used. But increasingly, you're seeing machine learning being used in these platforms, artificial intelligence, that they will analyze what a student response is, and then they will provide the student feedback or direction based on how that student responds.
There are so many innovations in publishing using digital media that we're still only at the beginning of how content can be written, distributed, and personalized. Do we have to rethink the meaning of what a textbook is?
So yes, so the word textbook today, it means so many different things to different people. I guess for students, it means something that's very expensive and a pain to lug around. But really, you can think of a textbook as learning curricula, or a learning system. And that really does change the way that content is distributed and the way that students will interact with that content. But one of the fundamentals that doesn't change is that the scholarship needs to be high, the accuracy needs to be high, and it needs to be very logically laid out for students so that difficult concepts are within their grasp.
Walk me through the process. Who are the authors? Do they approach you or do you approach them? How does a textbook begin to be written?
So it's interesting. Even though a lot of people in the community was complaining about the prices of textbooks, you very rarely heard complaints around the quality of the textbooks or the accuracy of them. So the publishers are known for quality development work, and we didn't think we needed to really change that model. So we peer review, we use professional editorial groups for copy editing, scientific accuracy, etc. So in that regard, we're very much like a traditional publisher. Mm-hmm. We also will acquire rights for previously published work, and we'll pay the author to take that content and then release it under an open license. We also develop resources from scratch, and we pay the authors for their work. Where we're different from traditional publishers is that we don't pay royalties, obviously, because we're giving away the right for free, and you can't pay royalties on that. And we also don't do single authored works, and we do that to manage schedule risk, so that we have a diversity of authors who can work together to get the projects done.
How do you avoid the Wikipedia problem? Many academics are wary of anything called open access because you run into accuracy problems at times.
Correct. That's the quality issue. And I think this is where OpenStax pivoted from the early parts of the OER movement. Our founder, Rich Baranek, original premise was, if we provide the tool, the platform, people will go and contribute, and then they will adapt to adopt it. Mm-hmm. But to his credit, about 8 years later, we were looking at the issue of scale, getting to scale, at the same time the high prices. And he discovered, and we discovered, that really the approach is get them to adopt, and then they will adapt. And if you look at it through that lens, then you have to apply a lot of rigor to the development of it. It's got to meet scope and sequence requirements. It's got to be scientifically accurate, etc. And when you apply that model, it actually does scale very quickly, but it requires a lot more upfront work. And it means that you're going to do fewer resources, but those that you're going to do are going to be higher quality. And then the proof is in the pudding, and people look at the resource, they say, yeah, that meets my scope and sequence, it's well explained, and they adopt it.
Do students prefer ebooks or print?
We were looking at this today, and the market is in flux right now. There is a move towards digital. We publish everything in our native platform, Connections, and we publish it as a PDF. We publish a web view, but we also provide print, because a good many students, about 10% of the students, still prefer print. And our mission, our philosophy is anywhere, anytime, any format, any device. We're not going to judge you the way that you want it. We just want you to have access to it.
The old model of education just isn't working for most of us poor slobs. Debt is huge, and something's got to give. Is open access part of the solution? And how sustainable can it be if it relies on philanthropy?
Well, that's a terrific question. So absolutely, open resources play a pivotal role. I live in California. If you live in California and you're in a community college, your curricular fees are more expensive now than your course. Mm-hmm. And that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of individual finances. And reducing those costs reduce barriers. So that's a very powerful argument for open education resources. Is it all going down to free? Absolutely not, because of these platforms, these learning platforms, but we can get the cost a lot lower, maybe in the $30 to $50 range. And then your question is a great one. Is it sustainable? And that's another area that we innovated. you can't give away high quality free items without philanthropy. There's no question about that. There's no model that works because it costs a lot of money to develop these. But what's on OpenStax is to maintain the library and do revisions and to sustain it. And there we've built an ecosystem of partners. We have about 50 partners. Some are distribution partners, some are platform partners that provide online homework and courseware. Some are institutional partners. But when a partner sells a good or service around our resources, they provide a mission support fee back to OpenStax. And that actually made us in the last year sustainable. So the library of OpenStax resources is now sustainable, and we're doing revisions on a regular basis.
You recently reached a deal with Barnes & Noble Education to begin selling these books in universities across the country. How important is this?
That was an arrangement we made this last week, and that was due to the increasing market share that we have, and then the growing demand for the print distribution. So now anyone who's using an OpenStax resource at a university that has a Barnes & Noble bookstore or independent bookstore will be able to more easily purchase the OpenStax book. So that's a good move, and we make these textbooks very affordable. So for instance, our sociology book, hardcover, 4-bound, is only $28 to the student. So that's a real benefit.
What are the total number of textbooks you have published, and how many universities are using them?
Oh, yeah. We have 29 textbooks that are published. These are mostly for what we would call general education courses in that freshman, early part of sophomore year. We're in over 50% of the degree granting institutions in the U.S., and we have roughly 12,500 adoptions, which is serving about 2.2 million students this fall.
You know, my oldest son is just starting high school now, so in 4 years he'll be entering college, and I'm hoping to use your services.
I think students are going to see declining costs, certainly in curricula, probably for the next 5 years. So you're in luck.
Wonderful. Great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you very much. And now for the news with Dan Holloway. He's a poet, an author, an entrepreneur, and an all-around interesting person. Hi, Dan. It's good to talk to you again. And I understand we should call you Speedy now.
So yes, yesterday, I apologize if I'm not making much sense today. Yesterday was the European Speed Reading Championships.
Great.
Which took place a long way away. It finished at 10:30 at night. I got home at 2:30, so I'm still tired. And my mind is on the fabulous book that we had to read. I managed to retain my title as European Speed Reading Champion.
So how long did it take you to read how many pages?
It was a 395 pages, I think about 113,000 words, and it took me 64 minutes.
Wow, that's amazing. And you were able to comprehend the whole thing? And
yes, it was a really, really good book. It helps that they tend to choose science fiction books with a really good plot.
Is there a trick to it?
Your eyes take things in when they're stationary, so when they're not moving. So there are two tricks. The one is to make your eyes move more smoothly between these fixations so that you're not skipping around all over the place. And the other is to train your peripheral vision so you take in more with each fixation. So essentially I trace a line down the middle of the book so that each line I only look at one position on the line and let my peripheral vision take in the rest of the line.
Well, that's amazing. You've been doing great feats of speed lately. You ran a 24-hour race, and
that's
now you're speed reading. Just, slow it down a little bit. Okay, well, speaking of reading, this is our back-to-school edition, and we're talking about rethinking the textbook. And first of all, they're too expensive. Earlier, I spoke to the editor-in-chief of OpenStax, which has a free open-source solution for students. But I understand that this issue of price is a problem in the UK, too?
Yeah, it's a real problem in the UK. And textbooks, academic publishing in general, I work for Oxford University, as everyone out there probably knows. We are one of the worst culprits. We produce books that regularly sell for between or start at around £80, which is $100, and textbooks not quite as bad, but still £40-50 for a textbook, and that's just one textbook, which is part of one course. So in a term, you will need maybe 5 textbooks per term. That adds up very quickly to a lot of money when people are already paying large amounts of fees. So it's really increasing the amount of debt people get into. If you go to libraries, then the library only has 3 or 4 copies, and you've got 20 people in the year taking a course. So you need the textbook with you all the time. So a library isn't the answer. And the traditional e-copies aren't the answer either, because as with regular libraries, the copies are limited. An ebook that you buy gives you one ebook, which is just the same as one book on the shelf. So that doesn't help. Libraries don't work for the numbers of students we have, so they have to buy their own textbooks or struggle. But one of the things we do have in the UK, we have, and I assume it's the same in America and Canada, we have some educational exemptions when it comes to photocopying of material. But in general, that only applies to 10% of the book. So your lecturer can make a copy of a textbook, but only one chapter at a time. And you can't give them one chapter one week and one chapter the next week. So even that, you have licenses up everywhere. You mustn't breach these licenses. Whether or not students do that on their own, I couldn't possibly comment. But there isn't a legal workaround. It's not like when we talk about indie authors who are making next to no money. Academic publishers their profits make Google look like amateurs when it comes to the bottom line. They're absolutely eye-watering, the profits that academic publishers make, and they make it on the back of exploiting students and writers.
The person I spoke to at OpenStax has one solution. Are there other solutions?
Subscription services are certainly being looked at and are being trialed, and some publishers are signing up to them, and that is an interesting idea. What would be absolutely great is if that becomes institutional subscriptions. So the way we have for journals, you pay a subscription to an academic journal as an institution. Again, it's quite an eye-watering amount, but when you average that out amongst all the students on a course, it becomes less eye-watering. So yes, institutional textbook subscription, so that rather than just having one ebook copy, as it were, you've got a site license, so anyone who's in your site can access an electronic copy of that book. That's definitely a way forward.
There was recently some news about a crackdown or a complaint about a site that actually did pirate actual books or PDFs of books. Can you explain that?
Yes. The site was called Ocean of PDF. It's a site where readers could post and say, and give the title of a book they couldn't get hold of, and ask someone to upload a PDF of the book. And then that PDF would be available to anyone who was a member of the site. There was a very big campaign in the UK media. It's a global site, but it seems to have hit a particular note with UK authors. Some very high-profile authors got a campaign together and got the site eventually taken offline at the start of this month. So yes, there are a lot of authors, especially indie authors, literary authors, people who don't get paid very much for their work and don't really make much of a living out of it, getting very upset with the site and, as I say, managing to get it taken offline.
But this hasn't been a big problem in the past. I'm surprised it's taken so long for this to be a problem.
There are lots of sites that tend to pop up and then get taken offline, and then new ones pop up and get taken offline. It's acknowledged to be a big problem, but there haven't really been sort of infamous hubs for doing it. This is the first time, I think, because well-known authors found their books on there, that this site has come under particular scrutiny. And whereas the other sites tend to be, a lot of piracy sites are basically malware sites, so they're not actually offering what they purport to be offering. They're just, if you sign up in the hope of getting a free ebook or a free tune or whatever, you actually get your computer infected. Or they're run by they're run by large groups of nefarious sorts who can afford to put up one site, and then if it gets taken down, they put up another one. Whereas this was being run, the site's owner had intended to run it almost as a social enterprise or a social cause for people in countries where they didn't have access to these books. So it's almost like two worlds were colliding.
But it's interesting. One solution that the music industry had to this problem was subscription services like Pandora.
Yeah.
And I think we're finding piracy is less common now because it's easier for me to pay $9.95 for a month for a subscription to Pandora, and then there's all the music I want. But that hasn't really worked yet. Nobody's really found a good formula for that for authors or for books.
There's Kindle Unlimited is the big one that does it,
mm-hmm.
and that obviously has had its own problems in recent months with a lot of scammers and the whole book stuffing issues, where people have essentially been gaming the system by writing these 3,000-page long books and then putting in slightly dodgy tables of contents which send you straight to the back of the book.
Right. And our fearless leader, Orna Ross, recently interviewed the UK representative for Amazon KDP and settled all this once and for all. So everything's smooth now, right?
The gamers will always be one step ahead. They will always, as soon as you know as soon as you make the rules clear, you make clear what the goalposts are that you're having to play with as someone who's gaming the system. That's the problem.
Well, speaking of artists making money or not making money, you've been looking at podcasts.
Yes. Basically, this is audiobooks are taking off, podcasts are taking off. It's almost as though if people want to take in interesting content on their headphones, podcasts are almost as popular as books. A lot of people listen to podcasts on the way to work. So there's increasingly a market for it, and that has led to several new portals, platforms for people to essentially crowdfund for their podcast, so that you don't have to go necessarily to somewhere like Patreon, which is a multi-arts platform. You've got ones that are format specific for podcasts.
Well, as you know, I embarked on a crowdfunding adventure using Patreon. I launched a Jewish-themed podcast last month, and I'm working on episode 2 right now. It's been getting great reviews, but so far, not too many patrons. Everybody wants stuff for free. I've been told I need to stick with it for at least 6 months, but it's tough to do all this work for free, especially for a freelancer. What are some of the other crowdfunding options for podcasts?
Well, there's a site called Anchor, which it works for Apple, it's built on the payment app Stripe, which you've probably heard of. It's one of the most popular forms of online payment. There's an Android one called Castbox, and what these do is they essentially allow you to tip. So you don't necessarily become a patron, but rather like sites like Medium are doing. I think you've tried Medium's partner services. Yeah.
I think I made something like 25 cents off of one blog post.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a similar principle that rather than becoming a subscriber or a patron of a person or a podcast, if there's content you like, you can press a button and tip it with a certain amount of money, or a certain amount of claps is what you do on Medium, and those add up. You get a center clap or whatever it is. So it's a way of instantly rewarding content that you like, and obviously the ones that generate the most of this become higher profile and so on for future releases. So it catches people in the moment while they're still excited, whereas something like Patreon, I guess, people think more carefully before they decide to make an ongoing commitment.
Now, our podcast is doing multiple platforms. I have mine on Patreon. It's there, and it's using their whole system. I've uploaded it to their servers, and I have patrons who pay me through that system. If I went ahead and launched it in a different site, is that done?
I think you'd have to be very clear what you're doing. So very clear to your patrons where you're putting what. Because you can do Patreon in various different ways, and some of the ways are to give exclusive content to your patrons. And obviously what you wouldn't want to do is for them to think they're getting exclusive content when it's not. But if you're doing it in the more general way of saying, this is something I'm doing, can you support me? You can either support me here on an ongoing basis, or you can go over here and do it on a podcast by podcast basis. Then if you're upfront about that, then that seems fine.
Right. Yeah, I'll have to rethink that. I'm going to try this exclusive Patreon only for another month or two, and then I'll see about branching off a little bit. And another option is finding a sponsor, which is a little more difficult to do.
I listen to a lot of running podcasts, and that's very different. That the really successful running podcasts get sponsors, but they get sponsors because there's a clear link between running and a popular podcast and the kind of product that would want to be sponsoring a running podcast. Whereas once you get off the subjects of conversation where there's that obvious link, I guess it becomes harder to find a sponsor.
Right. Well, I am happy to say that the AskALLi series of podcasts does have a sponsor, and we have a whole sponsorship package. And beginning in September, you're gonna hear my voice doing a little ad at the beginning of each podcast. So, very happy about that.
That's very exciting.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. Okay, so we talked about piracy. We talked about podcasting. We talked about textbooks. Anything else going on?
I would just add on the piracy front for people who are worried. Earlier in the month, I reported on a review that had been done on the first actual proper academic review of the actual impact that piracy makes on income streams across different cultural media.
Oh.
What it found is that there is a measurable impact. It's greatest in the film industry, which I guess isn't surprising. But even there, I think the figure is something like 4.1%. And when it comes to ebooks, it's around 1 to 1.5%. So the impact on the average writer of piracy will be 1 to 1.5% of their income. So it's however many downloads people are making. Obviously, it's people talk about it, and this is something that writers are very hot and picking up on, is when people who download free ebooks say, I've downloaded $10,000 worth of free ebooks. It's very easy to make the leap to saying that means that that's $10,000 worth of lost sales, which of course isn't the case. Because if they had to pay for them, they wouldn't be paying $10,000. They just wouldn't buy the books at all.
Right.
So the actual impact it's having on authors' income seems to be about 1 to 1.5%.
There could be a case where they wanted to, read an author and see if they like them, and then they'll buy the rest of the books. But that's, I guess, an optimistic way of looking at it. That's yes, and that's something that people like Cory Doctorow make that case. But that's a not necessarily a very popular view, as it were, right.
Amongst writers. I think it's probably right, but it's you need to be careful where you say it. I certainly wouldn't say it in a podcast.
Everybody, if you're listening, please pay for your books.
Pay for your books, yes, absolutely.
Because writers have to eat and support families and pay for textbooks for their kids. So, all right. Well, thank you again, Dan, and I can't wait to hear what you're up to next month.
Yes, and thank you, and very best of luck with the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to IndieVoices with me, Howard Lovy, Managing Editor of the Alliance of Independent Authors. Find more author advice and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And, if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org. Now, what are you waiting for? Go write and publish.